Welcome to today's video. We do have a great lesson in store for you. It is marvelous. You're going to be solving quadratic equations by the quadratic formula. And you've solved quadratic equations by graphing. Now we're going to use a quadratic formula to solve these quadratic equations. So if we look up here, it says solutions to the quadratic equation ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. If we have an equation in that form, we can solve them using the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula is this right here. And remember, you can only use this formula when a does not equal 0. A is not allowed to be 0 because 2 times 0 is 0, and you're not allowed to have 0 on the bottom of a fraction. All right, so the quadratic formula is inside that box. Basically, whatever number you have in for A, you plug it in to those two places for A. Whatever number you have here for B, you'll plug it into those two places for B. And whatever number you have in for C, it's plugged in right there. And then it's just a matter of working it out. One thing you do have to notice about the formula is that, remember when we graphed parabolas, quadratic functions here, you knew that the X intercepts were the answer. There were two of them. In that case, there's two of them. Occasionally, you will have them where they, let me extend this graph a little bit. Occasionally, you will have them where they sit right on the x-axis, and in that case there's only going to be one answer. There's technically two answers, but they are the same number, so there's really only one in that case because it only touches at one point. So how do we get two answers out of one formula? We get two answers out of one formula because you're going to do that problem twice. There's a plus sign, you do it, you add your first time through, and then there's a minus sign, you subtract the second time through. So that's what we're looking at there. So, all right. Well, how are we going to use this? Why is this stuff ever useful in real life? You use quadratic equations for lots of things in real life. Let's talk about one discussion here. This discussion talks about firing a bullet into the air. Like if you, I don't know, are excited, maybe you have a celebration you want to celebrate. Maybe it's New Year or 4th of July, or, you know, you've reached some sort of monumental birthday, or you've done something amazing. So let's imagine this situation, and we'll figure it out mathematically. So let's read. It says in a vacuum, and when I talk about a vacuum, I'm not talking about a vacuum that you have at your house that you sweep up, you know, your carpet with, or you know, that's around your garage that you use a shop vac to sweep up the floor or to sweep out your car. That's not the type of vacuum we're talking about. We're talking about like in a situation, when you hear people say in a vacuum, it means in a situation in which no outside forces act upon the object or the situation we're talking about. So like in this case, if we talk about firing a gun straight into the air, well, when you get to physics class, you're going to discuss this problem using real life scenarios, and in order to be exact, you have to take into account the shape of the bullet. The shape of the bullet determines how fast the bullet moves and how quick it comes back down to the ground. In air friction also affects some things. So like in a vacuum, you wouldn't have wind blowing to affect the route of the bullet, the motion of the bullet. In a vacuum, it just goes straight up and it just comes straight back down, is what we're talking about in a vacuum. So, and the reason why we talk about in a vacuum, we talk about it in a vacuum because I'm only trying to show you how to use the quadratic formula, not physics. Um, so that's why we only discuss this in a vacuum. All right, so let's look here. Let me come back to this one. This one doesn't have all the work there. So let's read along. It says, in a vacuum that does not account for friction, imagine firing a gun straight into the air. Not a real smart thing, because if you're standing underneath the bullet goes straight up. It's going to come back down at some point. So imagine firing a gun straight into the air. If the bullet leaves the gun around 3,000 feet per second, so it's traveling pretty fast. That's almost as fast as I run. Almost, though. How long will it take the bullet to reach the ground if it was fired 7 feet from above the ground? And I say 7 feet from above the ground because if you know, if you have a gun this height from the end of the barrel is going to be 7 feet. So you hold the gun up in there, point it straight up in there. That's 7 feet from the ground, and you might see that drawing right there in some sort of museum, some sort of art museum sometime soon. That's a classic. So let's go to the next page and figure out what we're doing here. All right, the formula we're going to use is this formula. And I know a lot of this seems a little bit confusing to you because it's not typically what you're used to. There's no X's, no Y's here. But if you can imagine, let's look at some of these things here and then I'll let you imagine. T, what does T stand for? Well, we come over here. T stands for time in seconds. So how many seconds is the bullet going to take to come back down to the ground? V sub 0. V sub 0 stands for the starting velocity, the original speed of the bullet. That's what V sub 0 is going to be. And H sub 0 is the starting height of the bullet. Starting height of the bullet. So let's go ahead and plug some values in here. Let's plug some values in. We're going to say H is equal to negative 16 t squared plus, what's the original velocity? How fast is it going? 3,000 feet per second. And remember, time's in seconds, so velocity should be in seconds. And it is. So we're going to say 3,000 feet per second times the time. And we're going to add the original height. Now, since this is above ground, this is going to be a positive number. So the starting height, 7 feet above ground. So we're going to put a 7 there. All right, now this is what I want you to imagine. I want you to imagine this is going to be y is equal to ax squared plus bx plus c. This is a quadratic function. And in order to solve this quadratic function, remember, y should be 0. Y should be 0 in this problem, because if we come back here to the problem, read the question. How long will it take the bullet to reach the ground? And we assume if we started 7 feet above the ground, that the ground is going to be a value of 0. The ground will be a value of 0. So that's how we are going to solve this. Plug this into the quadratic formula. So now we got to figure out what a, b, and c are going to be equal to. Instead of using x, we have t, which it's fine. We will sometimes use other variables, but we can still use the quadratic formula, even though it calls for x, as long as it follows this, this general form here. Ax squared plus bx plus c. So a is equal to, what's a equal to? Negative 16. What's b equal to? 3,000. Make sure you pay attention to your signs. And c is equal to 7. C is equal to 7. All right, now we need to go ahead and plug this in and work it out. Block off some room here for us. All right, the quadratic formula. It says x is equal to negative b, so that's negative 3,000 plus or minus the square root of b squared. So that'll be 3,000 squared minus 4 times a, which is negative 16, times c, which is 7. And we have all of that is going to be over top of 2 times a. Okay, now we have to work some of this stuff out. So let's go ahead and work some of this stuff out. Let's go ahead and draw a line here to separate our work. So we know x is equal to negative 3,000 plus or minus. Now, 3,000 squared is going to be 9 million. And we have negative 4 times negative 16 times negative 7. I'm sorry, that was a positive 7, not a negative 7. Negative 4 times negative 16 times 7. That would be a positive 448. And all of that is over top of negative 32. Just to do a little bit of simplifying here, plus or minus, it didn't work out because I was running out of room. Let me add some work here on the next page. We have x is equal to negative 3,000 plus or minus. Now we have 9 million plus 448, so that's going to be 9,448, and that's over top of negative 32. Next step. What is the square root of 9,448? I don't need the radical anymore because I took the square root of 9,448,000, and that's going to give me 3,000.075. I'll go 3 decimal places to be fairly accurate. And now this is the point where we're going to break this up, and we're going to have 2 answers. Okay, the first problem, we say x equals, x is equal to negative 3,000 plus 3,000.075 divided by negative 32. And then the other problem, it will say x is equal to negative 3,000 minus 3,000.075 divided by negative 32. And you might ask, where do we get the plus sign and where do we get the minus sign? It is right here. The plus sign goes there, and the minus sign will come here. And so now we're going to come up with both of our answers. We're going to come up with both of our answers. So basically what you do is you type the top part into a calculator and divide it by negative 32. Give me one moment here to work that out. On the left side, x is equal to negative 0.0023. And on the right side, x is equal to 187.5023. Now, what do these numbers represent? Well, let's go back a few slides here. This is good enough. We're going back a few slides. If we look at this problem, before I had y is equal to ax squared plus bx plus c. And we noticed that instead of x, we were using t. Instead of x, we were using t. So in this situation that we're talking about firing a gun, we don't want to use x. We were actually using t. I just used x because it was part of the quadratic formula. Okay, now what is happening here? We are standing and firing a gun. What do you think? 7 feet above the ground, it's going up, and then it's coming back down. Now, when we do this, we are talking about this is going to be time, and this is going to be height. And remember, this gun is being fired straight up into the ground. So straight up into the ground, or straight up into the ground. Wow, that wouldn't go very high. Wouldn't take very long to hit the ground either. This is being fired straight up into the air. And so we're trying to figure out how long it's going to take for it to come back down and hit the ground. This is not a direction. This is not like the bullet is not being fired to the right. The bullet is being fired straight up. So this says, you know, after so many seconds, this is the height of the bullet. And this just follows the height. It doesn't follow the direction. It's following a height. So basically, right about at this point here is the highest point, and this point here is the lowest point, which is where it's going to hit the ground. So our two answers, let's look at our two answers. Time is negative 0.0023. Well, that's going to be the time it's going to hit the ground right here. Right there. It's going to hit the ground at that point. That is that one there. Now the point that we're talking about here, 187, let's go back to the graph. 187 is this one right there. So how long is it going to take this bullet to hit the ground? Well, it's going to take 187. Wow, that was a pretty neat way to say it. 187.5. Remember, time was in seconds in this problem. 187.5 seconds to hit the ground. Well, what's 187.5 seconds? 187.5 seconds divided by what, 60 seconds? That's going to give us 3 minutes, 7.5 seconds. So if you fire a bullet from a gun straight up into the air, starting out at 7 feet, and it's traveling at 3,000 feet per second, this bullet will go straight up into the air and then come straight back down in 3 minutes, 7.5 seconds. So if you do that, you have a little bit of time to get out of the way, but do remember, this problem was solved in a vacuum. So if you do that, you could possibly still be hit by the bullet if you did it in real life, or the wind could make the bullet travel in a direction, and it could possibly injure somebody else or some animals or damage something. So I do not recommend shooting a bullet straight up into the air. Just giving you a real life situation in which this is useful. So this is the quadratic formula. This is the quadratic formula. It's kind of a lengthy process, but you still just, if you focus and pay attention to the details, you should get it right. Let's look at this next problem. This says find the x-intercepts, which are roots or zeros of the quadratic equation y equals x squared minus 4x plus 3. Now, when you find x-intercepts, the value of y is equal to 0. And that's the reason why we can put 0 in here and solve this using the quadratic formula. Okay? So we should have y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. This is something you have to memorize. Remember, a, b, and c, what are they equal to? A is 1. It's not 1x, it is just 1. B will be, if you think it's 4, you're not paying attention to the sign in front of 4. It's negative 4. And C is 3. So this is what we have. And it's just a matter of plugging it into the formula and solving it. You go ahead and try plugging it into the formula and see if you can get it plugged in. And then I will work it out. Go ahead and try that right now. And then check it with mine. Is this what you have? Remember, the formula, let's look at the formula. The formula has a negative sign, so therefore, if your b has a negative sign with it, you will get negative 4. And we all know what negative negative 4 makes. It makes a positive. Inside the radical symbol, what are we going to have inside the radical symbol? Well, if we're looking at negative 4 squared, I put negative 4 in parentheses because it has a negative sign with it. We are actually squaring negative 4. So negative 4 times negative 4 is 16. And then here on the right, you have negative 4 times 1, which is negative 4, and then times that by 3, you get negative 12. On bottom, 2 times 1 is 2. So this is what we have. So x is equal to, what do we have inside here? 16 minus 12. 16 minus 12 is 4. And that's what we're left with. And what is the square root of 4? This is where I'm going to split off both of these problems. What's the square root of 4? That's 2. And 2. I have made one of them plus, and I have made the other one minus to take care of the plus or minus right there. And let's go ahead and work these out. 4 plus 2 is 6, and 6 over 2 is 3. 4 minus 2 is 2. 2 over 2 is 1. So the x-intercepts are going to be 1 and 3. If you were to graph the function that we started out with, x squared minus 4x plus 3, you would see that it would cross the x-axis at 1 and 3. Let's go ahead and look at this next one here. Go ahead and try and set it up. Go ahead and try and set it up, figure out what a, b, and c are equal to. And we are finding x-intercepts, which are the roots, are 0. So in that case, if we're finding those, y will be equal to 0. And that's the reason why we can use the quadratic formula, because y is equal to 0. So in doing this, a would have been positive 6, which is not right. A is in front of x squared, which is positive 2. B is in front of x, which is 6. And C is negative 9. Pay attention to your signs. So go ahead and try and set that up into the quadratic formula. I'll try and set it up, and then I will set it up while you do that, and you can see if they match up. And this is what you should have. And if you noticed, I made this 6. I didn't put it in parentheses for the simple fact that if we look over here at B, it's already positive. So if I'm going to say negative, and then I put the positive 6 in parentheses, it's just the same as having negative 6. And right here, when I squared it, it was a positive 6, so I don't need to have it in parentheses. Okay, so this is the first step. Let's go to the next step. We say negative 6 plus or minus 6 squared, 36. And we're going to say negative 4 times 2 is negative 8, and negative 8 times negative 9 is a positive 72. And on the bottom, 2 times 2 is 4. So if we go from there, next step here, we're going to figure out what 36 plus 72 is. Ooh, I don't like that color. Let's get this green. So negative 6 plus or minus. 36 plus 72 is going to be 108. And we divide that by 4. Now, the square root of 108, that's not a perfect square. So we're going to approximate that. We're going to approximate it. So we're going to say negative 6 plus, and what is the square root of 108? Well, I know the square root of 100 is 10. So it's going to be just above 10 a little bit. And that is 10.39. If you actually have a calculator that will do it, you can type negative 6 plus, not plus or minus, just plus, negative 6 plus the square root of 108. You press the enter button, and then you'll say divided by 4, and that will give you a more exact answer than rounding the square root of 108 to 10.39. But this is what we have to work with, so this is what we're going to do. So we have two problems. First one has a plus, the second one will have a minus. And let's go ahead and work these out. Negative 6 plus 10.39 is 4.39 divided by 4. And 4.39 divided by 4 is going to give us 1.0975. So I'm going to round that to 1.10. Go down here to the other part of the problem. Negative 6 minus 10.39 is negative 16.39. And we divide that by negative 4. That's not divided by negative 4, it's divided by positive 4. But we still get negative 4.0975, which I'm going to round to 4.10. And so we have our two answers. Our two X intercepts. Remember, we rounded the square root of 108, so these aren't exact, but these are pretty close. And these are pretty close here. So, negative 4.10 and 1.10 are the two intercepts. You go ahead and try this one on your own. Go ahead and try this one on your own and pause the video. I'm going to work it out. I'm going to work it out in a quicker fashion than I have been on the last few examples. So work this out, and then we'll check our answers at the end. All right, if we look here, A is equal to negative 4, B is equal to a negative 8, and C is equal to a 1. Let's plug these in. X is equal to negative 8. So negative 8 is going to make a positive 8. The square root. Now, if I'm going to have b squared, what is negative 8 squared? Negative 8 times negative 8 is 64. And I'm going to have negative 4 times negative 4 times 1. And on bottom, I'm going to have 2 times negative 4. So let's go ahead and work some of this out. We have 8 plus or minus 64. If we have negative 4 times negative 4, that's 16. Times it by 1, it's positive 16. And on bottom, 2 times negative 4 is negative 8. So let's go ahead and figure out what this is. 64 plus 16 is going to be 80. So we have 8 plus or minus the square root of 80 divided by negative 8. Oh, got rid of my 0. We need to keep it there. So we're going to have two problems. What is the square root of 80? That's the question. Square root of 80 is approximately equal to 8.945. 4427, but we're going to simplify that a little bit. And that makes sense because the square root of 81 is 9. And the square root of 80 should be just a little bit below 9. 8.94 is just a little bit below 9. So the first problem we added. Second problem we are going to subtract. Now let's go ahead and work some things out here. 8 plus 8.94 is 16.94. 16.94. And 16.94 divided by negative 8 is going to give us a negative 2.1175. So let's round that to 2.18. Nope. 2.117. 2.12. Now if we look here at the second part of the problem, right here, 8 minus 8.94 is going to leave us with a negative 0.94. And we know a negative divided by a negative is going to leave us with a positive answer. And that is going to be 0.1175, 0.12. And so you have your two intercepts, 0.12 and negative 2.12. All right, this equation here, this is just like the other ones there before, except it's not asking you to find intercepts. There's no y in this problem. It's just asking you to solve. You still solve it the same way. We have to get it set equal to 0. So in order to get it set equal to 0, we add 2 to both sides. And now we have negative 3x squared plus 5x and plus 2 is equal to 0. And from here, we determine what a, b, and c are. Okay, it should say ax squared. A is negative 3, plus bx, which is 5, plus c, which is a positive 2. And so from here, we work this out. X is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c over top of 2 times a. And I know I was reading that out loud and writing numbers down. If you get in the habit of reading it out loud and using the actual quadratic formula, saying the letters, if you say those letters but write numbers, every time you do this problem, you'll be stating the quadratic formula, which will put it into your memorization there. So let's look here. We have negative 5 plus or minus. Well, we know 5 squared is 25. And we have negative 4 times negative 3, which is a positive 12, times that by 2. Positive 12 times 2 is a positive 24. And 2 times negative 3, negative 6. Okay. We know 25 plus 24, that's 49. So the square root of 49, that's going to be 7. That's going to be an easy number to work with, right? Easier than those decimals we've been getting. So first problem, 5 plus 7 is equal to negative 6. And the second problem, negative 5 minus 7 is equal to negative 6. So let's go ahead and do the top one. Negative 5 plus 7 will give us, negative 5 plus 7 will give us 2 over negative 6, which is equal to a negative 1/3. And on bottom, Negative 5 minus 7 is negative 12, or negative 6, which is equal to a negative 2. So this is what I have for the answers. Negative 1/3 and negative 2. Got one more here. I know this one has the letter D in it, but just remember, over here in the quadratic formula, instead of X, D is going to be equal to that stuff. It's going to be equal to the quadratic formula. So go ahead and see if you can work this out, and then check your solution with mine. Go ahead and pause the video. Here's A, there's B, and there's C, and they're all positive. So D is equal to negative 14 plus or minus B squared, B squared. So what is 14 squared? 196. Minus 4 times A times C. So 4 times 9 is 36. And then times C, 36 times 3. 36 times 3. 108. 108. And I know I didn't mess with the negative sign there, the negative sign, because, you know, I just talked about positive numbers, and then I just left the negative sign as the negative sign. And on bottom we have 2 times A, which is 2 times 9. We know that's 18. So we're just trying to, I've just simplified this so that way we don't have as many steps to get the problem done. I've done some of this in my head. So we're going to have negative 14 plus or minus the square root of, so 196 minus 108, that's going to be 88. And then so from here, we go ahead and work this out. Let's go ahead and, I don't want to do that one. Let's go ahead and have both of our problems. We're going to have 2 problems. Okay, let's go ahead and get that done. Now we need to know what the square root of 88 is. The square root of 88, I know the square root of 81 is 9. So the square root of 88 should be just a little bit above 9. And it is 9.38. So our 2 problems, negative 14 plus 9.38 over top of 18. I was going to put my second problem here, but I think I'm going to run out of room. So second problem, negative 14 minus 9.38 divided by 18. Remember, one's a plus and one's a minus. So now we have both of our answers coming along. So let's look through here. Negative 14.9 plus 9.38 is going to give us a negative 4.62 divided by 18. And negative 4.62 divided by 18 leaves us with a negative 0.257. And I went ahead and went to the 7, the third decimal place, because it rounded off. It was a repeating 6 there. And then on the bottom, negative 14 minus 9.38 is going to be a negative 23.38 over 18. And negative 23.38 over 18 is going to leave us with a negative 1.299. I rounded that third decimal place again on that one. So we have two answers. Our two solutions to this problem, negative 0.257 and negative 1.299. Let's go ahead and look at, I have a problem here. This one has a fraction. I think this is going to be the last one that we have for the video. So let's go ahead and end it on a fraction, and we'll call it a good day. Remember, it's supposed to equal 0. How's it going to equal 0? We could add 6x to the left side. So we're going to have 1/2 x squared plus 6x. And we also need to add 13 to both sides. So let's go ahead and add that 13 in there to save us a step. Yeah, that's what we have. 1/2 x squared plus 6x plus 13 is equal to 0. You could have, at the very beginning, you could have subtracted 1/2. You could have subtracted 1/2 from both sides, and then you would have had to work with some negative numbers. So let's go ahead and figure out what we have. We have A, we have B, and we have C. Plug this into the quadratic formula. So negative B, so it's negative 6, plus or minus B squared. 6 squared is 36. We're going to say minus 4 times A times C. So 4 times A times C. Make sure you extend your radical sign out over top of those, the problem. And on the bottom, 2 times A, 2 times A. Let's go ahead and work this out. Negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 36. Now, if we have negative 4 times 1/2, that's a negative 2. Half of 4 is 2, so that's why. So we have negative 2 there, and then negative 2 times 13 is a negative 26. And then if we look, 2 times 1/2, half of 2 is going to be a 1, and really, we don't even need that 1 down there. Because if you have 1 on the bottom of the fraction, it's just 1. So 36 minus 26 is going to be 10. So we're going to have the square root of 10 there. So let's go ahead and put our two problems. Our two problems is going to say negative 6 minus, what's the square root of 10? Square root of 10, well, I know the square root of 9 is 3, and 10 is just a little bit bigger than 9. So the square root of 10 is going to be 3.16. And I don't need to put divided by 1 because it's just divided by 1. It'll still be whatever we have on top. And then the other problem, negative 6 plus 3.16. And let's go ahead and work these out. Negative 6 plus 3.16 is going to give us a negative 2.84. And negative 6 minus 3.16 is going to give us a negative 9.16. So we have two answers here. Negative 2.84 and negative 9.16. Well, that's all we have for this lesson. I hope it's helped you to try and solve quadratic equations. All right, so we're going to look at this problem here. You're finding the intercepts. Okay, so we're looking at this problem here, finding the x-intercepts. Remember, when you find x-intercepts, the y value of an x-intercept is 0. And that's the reason why you're able to use the quadratic formula, is because y is equal to 0. So if we look here, A, B, and C. A, B, and C. Well, what are they? Well, A is in front of x squared, which is a positive 2. B is in front of x, which is a 6. And C is the constant term on the end, which is a negative, pay attention to the sign, 9. And so let's plug this into the formula and solve it out. We're going to have x is equal to negative b, which is negative 6, plus or minus b squared, which is 6 squared, minus 4 times a times c. And I'm going to extend my radical over top of all those numbers. And on the bottom, 2 times a. And you might ask why I did not put that 6 in parentheses, is because if we look over here at b, it's already a positive 6. And if I say negative 6 in parentheses, we're just going to make another step for ourselves and say that it was negative 6. So that's the reason why I didn't do that. And because b was positive, that's the reason why I didn't put 6 squared. That's why I didn't put 6 in parentheses there. So your next step, let's go ahead and work this out. We're going to have negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 6 squared is 36. And if we have negative 4 times 2, that's negative 8. And negative 8 times negative 9, which is a positive 72. And 2 times 2 on the bottom is 4. And so from here, we're going to have negative 6 plus or minus the square root of, what is 36 plus 72? That is 108. And on the bottom, we still have 4. Okay, we're going to have two problems now. The square root of 108. The square root of 108, well, we know the square root of 100 is 10, so the square root of 108 must be a little bit bigger than 10. And we're right. Negative 6 plus 10.39 over top of 4. The square root of 108 was 10.39. And so remember, since we have plus or minus, we have two problems. First time it's a plus, and the second time it's going to be a minus. And so now we should work these out. If we have negative 6 plus 10.39, that's going to be a positive 4.39 divided by 4, which is equal to 1.0975 and 1.0975 will round up to 1.10. And down here on the bottom, if we have negative 6 minus 10.39, that's going to be negative 16.39. And negative 16.39 divided by 4 is going to give us, well, it's going to give us a negative 4.0975, which I will round to 4.10. And so we have both of the x-intercepts, negative 4.10 and 1.10. I want you to go ahead and look at the next problem here. Try the next problem on your own, see if you can work it out, and see if you can find what the intercepts are. Pause the video, I'll work this out fairly quickly there for you. Alright, so we know that this has to be 0. Y has to be 0. So there's A, there's B, and there's C. let's go ahead and plug this into the quadratic formula. Negative, negative 8. Negative, negative 8 is going to be a positive 8. And negative 8 squared, that's negative 8 times negative 8, which is 64. And then we're going to say negative 4 times A times C. And then on the bottom we have 2 times negative 4, which is negative 8. Alright, let's go ahead and see what we can do here. We know negative 4 times negative 4 is a positive 16, times it by 1. So that's a positive 16. So we have 64 plus 16. 64 plus 16 is going to give us the square root of 80 over top of, so we have 8 plus or minus the square root of 80 over top of negative 8. Square root of 80. Well, we know the square root of 80 is just below the square root of 81. And the square root of 81 is 9, so the square root of 80 should be just below 9, and it's going to be approximately 8.94. So we have two problems here. We have 8 plus 8.94 divided by negative 8. And then down here we're going to have 8, and this time we're going to subtract 8.94 divided by negative 8. So 8 plus 8.94 is going to be 16.94 divided by negative 8. And so 16.94 divided by negative 8 is a negative 2.1175, so we will say 2.12. And down here on the bottom, 8 minus 8.94 is going to give us a negative 0.94 divided by negative 8. And we know negative divided by negative is a positive, so we're going to get 0.1175. We'll let the 7 round the 1 up to a 2. And so now you have both of your intercepts, 0.12 and negative 2.12.